Long before he became the face of a nation, George Washington was just a boy on the far edge of a crumbling empire. He was born on February 22, 1732, in the British colony of Virginia. The world he entered was vast, rural, and governed by a monarchy across the ocean. His family was considered upper middle class. Planters, yes, but not aristocracy. George's early life was shaped by the land. His father, Augustine Washington, owned tobacco plantations and slaves, and provided young George with a stable if unremarkable start. But when Augustine died suddenly in 1743, George was only 11. He lost his protector, his financial security, and any chance at an elite British education like his older half-brothers. He wouldn't inherit wealth. He would have to build his own future. With limited schooling, George became a student of life. He taught himself geometry, trigonometry, and surveying. He read farming guides, etiquette manuals, and military histories. He copied letters and essays just to learn how educated men wrote and spoke. He studied people, their words, expressions, and weaknesses. At age 16, he joined a surveying expedition into the Virginia wilderness. Through thick forests and wild terrain, he mapped out land for settlers and earned his first income. He saw how land worked, how it could be measured, claimed, and sold. He saw what power looked like in America, not noble titles or royal blood, but land, connections, and reputation. By the time he turned 21, the British colonies were on the edge of war. France and Britain were clashing over control of the Ohio River Valley. In 1753, Virginia's governor sent Washington to deliver a warning to the French. It failed, but he returned alive, showing bravery, maturity, and a hunger for responsibility. In 1754, he led a small force to attack a French scouting party. It was a bold move, but also a mistake. The clash at Jumonville Glen helped spark the global conflict, now known as the 7 Years' War. Later, Washington was forced to surrender Fort Necessity in a humiliating defeat. But his reports were clear, honest, and composed. London took notice. So did Virginia. He served as an aide to British General Edward Braddock and survived a brutal ambush that killed most of the general's army. Washington had 2 horses shot out from under him and bullet holes in his coat, but he emerged without a scratch. To many, it seemed like fate was protecting him. He would go on to command Virginia's militia, earning respect. Washington retired from military life in 1758 and married Martha Custis, a wealthy widow with 2 children. Through this marriage and smart land deals, Washington became one of the richest planters in Virginia. He expanded Mount Vernon, managed over 8,000 acres, and enslaved more than 100 people. Though he enjoyed wealth, he lived with contradictions. He prized honor, but benefited from a system built on forced labor. He valued liberty, yet denied it to the very people who made his lifestyle possible. In public, Washington rarely spoke on politics, but behind closed doors, he was watching Britain closely and growing uneasy with its policies. By the 1760s, the British Parliament passed law after law that squeezed the colonies: the Sugar Act, the Stamp Act, the Townshend Acts. Each one taxed goods or limited trade. Each one fueled resentment. Washington, a loyal subject at heart, initially wanted reconciliation. But the Crown's refusal to listen, to treat Americans as equals, slowly hardened his views. The Boston Massacre, the Tea Act, the Intolerable Acts. One by one, lines were crossed. The colonies weren't just angry now. They were organizing. In 1774, Washington was chosen as a delegate to the First Continental Congress. And in 1775, as the first shots were fired at Lexington and Concord, the colonies needed a leader. They needed someone who was Southern, respected, disciplined, and trustworthy. They chose George Washington. Washington arrived at Boston in July 1775 to lead the newly formed Continental Army. What he found was chaos, militia without discipline, no uniforms, little food, and no clear chain of command. He imposed order, slowly, steadily, sometimes brutally. He organized the siege of Boston and forced the British to evacuate in March 1776. But the war was far from over. Later that year, British forces overwhelmed him in New York. His army was pushed back again and again. Desertions rose, supplies ran out. Defeat seemed inevitable. But Washington didn't quit. In December, he crossed the icy Delaware River and struck the Hessians at Trenton in a surprise attack. A small victory, yet a psychological turning point. He had shown the world that the Americans would not go quietly. For 8 long years, Washington led an underpaid, outgunned army against the most powerful empire on earth. He lost battles, many of them, but he never lost his nerve. He held the army together at Valley Forge, where soldiers starved and froze. He navigated mutinies, betrayals, and endless political bickering in Congress. He avoided tyrannical power. When some officers proposed making him a monarch, he shut it down immediately. In 1781, with French support, Washington trapped British forces at Yorktown. The surrender of General Cornwallis effectively ended the war. The colonies had won their independence, and George Washington, once a rejected colonial officer, was now the most respected man in America. And then he did the unthinkable. He resigned. In December 1783, Washington entered Congress, bowed, and gave up his military command. He had power. He had fame. He could have ruled. Instead, he went home, to his farm, to silence. His act shocked the world. Even King George III reportedly said, "If he does that, he will be the greatest man in the world." But America struggled to govern itself. Under the Articles of Confederation, the states were divided and chaotic. The economy collapsed. Factions grew. In 1787, Washington presided over the Constitutional Convention. He didn't speak much, but his presence gave the process credibility. In 1789, the Constitution was ratified. America had a new government, and once again, the people turned to George Washington. He was unanimously elected the first president of the United States. No campaigns, no speeches, just trust. Washington's presidency was filled with firsts. He established the cabinet: Hamilton, Jefferson, Knox. He set the tone for how a president should act: restrained, dignified, above petty politics. But problems quickly rose: debt, foreign threats, domestic unrest. He approved Hamilton's National Bank, which stabilized the economy, but deepened political divisions. In 1791, a whiskey tax led to armed rebellion in western Pennsylvania. Washington personally led troops to suppress it, showing that this new government would enforce its laws. He chose neutrality when France went to war with Britain. This infuriated Jefferson's followers, but preserved American independence. And in 1793, he served a second term, reluctantly. He hated the growing political parties and the vicious press attacks. He felt old, worn, and trapped. In 1796, Washington stunned the country again. He declined a third term. In his farewell address, he warned against political parties, foreign alliances, and regional division. It wasn't a speech. It was a blueprint. He wasn't just leaving office. He was defining what an American leader should be. Then he left, quietly, back to Mount Vernon, back to farming, back to the life he had always wanted. Just 3 years later, in December 1799, Washington rode out into freezing rain to check on his property. He returned with a sore throat. By morning, he was gasping for air. Doctors bled him, blistered him, drained him. He refused to cry out. He gave them his last instructions, calmly. On December 14, 1799, George Washington died at age 67. The nation he helped create was shaken. Cities held days of mourning. Bells tolled for hours. He had built the office of the presidency, led a war without becoming a tyrant, and shaped a democracy that would outlive him. Far Washington's rise was slow. His leadership wasn't flashy. It was controlled, moral, and deliberate. And his fall wasn't a collapse. It was a choice. He gave up power twice. First after war, then after the presidency. In both moments, he could have become something else. A king, a ruler for life. But Washington believed in something bigger than himself. A republic. A country led by laws, not men. That's the rise and fall of George Washington. He rose by building trust, and he fell by giving it all away, so the United States could rise in his place.